If you're over 40 and still living paycheck to paycheck, this isn't a video about shame. It's a warning. And it's coming from someone who spent most of his life watching this happen over and over again. My name is Walter. I'm 84 years old. I've been investing, advising, and quietly observing people's financial lives for more than 5 decades. I've seen bull markets, crashes, booms, recessions, layoffs, inflation waves, and once-in-a-lifetime crises that somehow happen every 10 years. And I can tell you something most financial gurus won't say out loud. If you are over 40 and still living paycheck to paycheck, it is not because you are lazy. It is not because you are bad with money. And it is not because the system is broken, at least not in the way you think. It's because you were taught the wrong game. Let me paint a picture that will sound painfully familiar to millions of Americans. You work, you earn, you pay the bills. You breathe for a moment when the paycheck hits, and then it's gone. Rent or mortgage, car payment, insurance, groceries that somehow cost 40% more than they did a few years ago, subscriptions you barely remember signing up for, a credit card balance that never seems to go down, no matter how responsible you try to be. And every month, you tell yourself the same lie. Once I earn a little more, things will finally stabilize. I've watched people tell themselves that lie at 30, at 40, at 55, and even at 65. Here's the hard truth most Americans never hear until it's too late. Income does not fix financial fragility. I've met surgeons making $400,000 a year who were one missed paycheck away from panic. I've met executives with luxury homes who couldn't survive 3 months without a salary. And I've met teachers and small business owners who quietly built financial independence on modest incomes, not because they earned more, but because they played a different game. The real divide in America isn't rich versus poor. It's people who rely on income versus people who rely on systems. If you are over 40 and still living paycheck to paycheck, your problem is not money, it's structure. Let me explain something that may sting a little, but it will change how you see your life. Most Americans believe financial success comes from effort. Work harder, get promoted, side hustle, grind. That advice works in your 20s. It starts failing in your 30s. And by your 40s, it quietly turns into a trap. Because after 40, life gets heavier. Your body doesn't recover the same way. Your responsibilities multiply. Your margin for mistakes shrinks. And time, the one asset you can't earn more of, becomes brutally expensive. Yet most people are still playing the same financial game they learned at 22. Trade time for money, spend what's left, hope nothing goes wrong. And something always goes wrong. A medical bill, a layoff, a divorce, a sick parent, a recession that nobody could have predicted. Here's something I want you to really hear. Living paycheck to paycheck after 40 is not a phase. It's a trajectory. Unless something changes structurally, it doesn't magically improve with age. It gets tighter, scarier, and more exhausting. This is the moment where many people turn to motivation videos, budgeting apps, or extreme frugality. They cut coffee. They cancel small pleasures. They track every dollar. And they still feel stuck. Why? Because budgeting is defensive, and defense alone never wins a long game. What actually traps people financially after 40 is what I call comfort momentum. Your lifestyle isn't extravagant, but it's rigid. Your expenses aren't insane, but they're fixed. Your habits feel normal, and that's the most dangerous part. You don't feel broke enough to panic, but you're not free enough to breathe. That middle zone is where decades disappear. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, even if only in your own mind. If your income stopped tomorrow, how long could you live without fear? 1 month? 2? 3? Most Americans over 40 can't make it past 60 days. And that has nothing to do with intelligence. It has everything to do with how their financial life was designed. You were taught to optimize comfort, not resilience. You were taught to chase lifestyle, not leverage. You were taught to depend on income, not ownership. And the older you get, the more expensive those lessons become. In my 30s, I lived paycheck to paycheck too, even as my income grew. What saved me wasn't a raise. It wasn't a lucky investment. And it definitely wasn't motivation. It was one brutal realization. If I didn't build systems that worked without me, I would be forced to work forever. Not because I loved work, but because fear would give me no choice. And fear is a terrible financial advisor. In the next part, I'm going to show you why raises and promotions often make people poorer, not safer. The invisible financial cliff most Americans hit between 45 and 55. The exact moment when I'll fix it later turns into it's too late. And the one shift that separates people who escape the paycheck cycle from those who never do. If this already feels uncomfortably familiar, that's not a bad sign. It means you're finally looking at the right problem. Here's something almost no one wants to admit, especially in America. The years between 45 and 55 are not neutral financially. They are dangerous. This is the decade where most people either quietly secure their future or lock themselves into permanent dependence on income. And the terrifying part is that from the outside, nothing looks wrong. You still have a job. You still pay the bills. You still look successful enough. But underneath, the math has already turned against you. Expenses harden, flexibility disappears, and risk tolerance collapses. Let me explain what actually happens. In your 20s, mistakes are cheap. In your 30s, they're recoverable. After 40, mistakes compound faster than wins. One bad financial decision can take a decade to undo. One missed opportunity can permanently lower your ceiling. Yet most people keep doing exactly what they've always done. They focus on income instead of structure. They chase raises instead of leverage. They upgrade lifestyle instead of building buffers. And they tell themselves the most dangerous sentence in personal finance: I'll start once things calm down. Things never calm down. Life doesn't get cheaper. Responsibilities don't shrink. And your energy does not increase with time. This is why raises don't save people. I've watched it for decades. A raise feels like relief, and then it quietly turns into permission. Permission to spend more. Permission to commit to higher fixed costs. Permission to believe you're safer than you actually are. Most people don't use raises to buy freedom. They use them to buy obligations, bigger house, nicer car, more normal expenses. And suddenly they're earning more but breathing less. I want you to understand this clearly. Paycheck to paycheck living after 40 is rarely about income level. It's about dependency. If your entire financial life depends on you showing up every day, staying healthy, staying employed, and staying relevant in a market that doesn't care about loyalty, you are not secure. You are exposed. And the exposure grows every year. This is where fear quietly enters people's decisions. Fear makes people cling to jobs they hate. Fear makes them avoid learning new skills. Fear makes them delay investing because, what if I need the money? Fear turns smart adults into cautious prisoners of their own routines. And here's the cruel irony. The more afraid you are to change, the more urgent change becomes. Let me tell you what financially free people do differently. And I don't mean influencers or lottery winners. I mean quiet, boring, unremarkable people who sleep well at night. They stop asking, how do I earn more? And start asking, how do I reduce dependency? They build margin before lifestyle. They prioritize liquidity before luxury. They design systems that function even when motivation disappears. This is the shift most Americans never make. They think freedom comes from success. In reality, freedom comes from optionality. The ability to say no. The ability to step back. The ability to survive disruption without panic. Optionality doesn't require millions. It requires structure. Let me give you a simple but uncomfortable test. If your employer disappeared tomorrow, would you still have dignity in your decisions? Or would every choice be dictated by urgency? Most people over 40 already know the answer. And that's why this topic is so painful. Because deep down they sense time closing in. They sense that the window for easy correction has passed. But here's the part I need you to hear carefully. It is not too late. But it is no longer accidental. After 40, financial change is intentional, or it doesn't happen at all. You cannot drift into stability anymore. You must design it. And that starts by confronting the real problem. Not spending, not budgeting, not motivation. The real problem is that your financial life was built to maximize comfort today, not safety tomorrow. Comfort feels good, but it's fragile. Safety feels boring, but it's powerful. People who escape paycheck to paycheck living later in life do three things differently. First, they stop increasing fixed costs, no matter how tempting. Fixed costs are financial gravity. They lock your future into place. Second, they build a non-negotiable buffer, not an emergency fund they hope to save someday, but a system that accumulates automatically and is treated like rent. Third, they begin acquiring assets that do not require their constant presence, not speculative gambles, not hype, boring, repeatable, understandable assets. This is where many people panic and say, I don't have time to learn investing. What they really mean is, I'm afraid of making a mistake. But avoiding learning is itself the most expensive mistake after 40. Because inflation doesn't care about your fear. Layoffs don't wait for confidence. And retirement does not negotiate. The people who win later in life are not the smartest. They are the ones who accepted reality earlier. They stopped pretending that income equals safety. They stopped outsourcing their future to employers, governments, or hope. They took responsibility without drama. And slowly, quietly, their stress decreased. Not because life got easier, but because their structure got stronger. In the final part, I'm going to show you exactly what that structure looks like in real life. Not theory, not hype. Practical principles that real people over 40 use to break the paycheck cycle without gambling their future. If this is hitting close to home, stay with me. Now let me show you what actually works after 40, when time is no longer forgiving and mistakes are expensive. I'm not going to sell you a fantasy. I'm not going to promise overnight wealth. What I'm going to give you is something far more valuable at this stage of life: clarity. The first thing people who escape paycheck to paycheck living do is brutally redefine what enough means. Not emotionally, mathematically. They stop chasing an ever-moving lifestyle target and instead define a survival number, a stability number, and a freedom number. Survival is simple. How much does it cost for you to exist without panic? Food, housing, health care, utilities, nothing extra. Stability is next. Survival plus breathing room. The ability to handle surprises without debt. Freedom comes last. Freedom is not luxury. Freedom is choice. The mistake most Americans make is trying to jump straight to freedom without securing survival and stability. That's how people end up stressed, over-leveraged, and stuck. Financial peace is built in layers, not leaps. The second shift is where most people resist the hardest. They stop optimizing their life around income and start optimizing around margin. Margin is unused capacity, time, cash, energy, flexibility. Margin is what allows you to say no. And no is the most powerful financial word after 40. Without margin, every decision feels urgent. With margin, decisions become strategic. This is why people with lower incomes but high margin often feel calmer than high earners drowning in obligations. The third shift is ownership. And this is where the word scares people unnecessarily. Ownership does not mean risky bets or day trading. It means owning pieces of systems that produce value without your constant labor. Index funds, cash-flowing businesses, royalties, real assets. It's not about being clever. It's about being consistent. The earlier you start, the more forgiving the process. The later you start, the more disciplined you must be. But discipline works at any age. I've seen people start at 48, at 52, even at 60. What mattered was not speed, it was direction. The fourth shift is identity, and this one is uncomfortable. You must stop seeing yourself as someone who earns money and start seeing yourself as someone who allocates capital. Even if the capital is small, especially if it's small. Every dollar you control is a vote for your future. Most people never learn to vote. They only spend. The fifth shift is patience. Real patience, not passive waiting. The kind that comes from understanding compounding, risk, and time horizons. The people who succeed later in life stop reacting to headlines. They stop chasing trends. They stop trying to feel smart. They focus on being unbreakable. Here's something I want you to really internalize. The goal is not to get rich. The goal is to become hard to hurt, hard to scare, hard to trap. That's freedom. When you build even modest systems that reduce dependency on your paycheck, something profound happens. Your stress drops. Your thinking improves. Your options expand. You stop making decisions from fear. And fear is what keeps people paycheck to paycheck more than any bill ever could. If you're over 40 and still living paycheck to paycheck, the clock is not your enemy. Denial is. You don't need motivation. You need structure. You don't need a miracle. You need alignment. And you don't need to do everything at once. You just need to stop doing nothing. Start by creating margin, then build buffers, then acquire ownership slowly and deliberately. If you do that, something changes within a few years, not externally, internally. You stop feeling hunted by the calendar. You stop fearing the next surprise. You stop lying awake at night wondering what happens if something goes wrong. And you stop making decisions from calm instead of panic. That's when life opens up again. Not because you became rich, but because you became free enough to breathe. If this video resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Be honest. What do you think is keeping you stuck in the paycheck cycle right now? Income, fear, lifestyle, or simply not knowing where to start? Write it in the comments. I read them. And more importantly, others reading will realize they're not alone. This channel exists for one reason: to help people build financial freedom realistically, especially later in life, when advice is scarce and pressure is high. If you want to understand money, freedom, and structure without hype or nonsense, subscribe. This isn't about getting rich fast. It's about not staying stuck forever.